Hello, James Lockridge here again. I just wanted to share with you some of my thoughts about ministry and the visual aspect of ministry. I think it's important. Somebody wrote it a long time ago. I don't know how they figured these things out, but they said what goes by your ears, just you listen to somebody talking, you only retain about 10% of it usually, if you're lucky. But if you can see as well as hear, if there's a visual presented, it jacks the retention level up to about 60 something percent. And if you can see, hear, and do, you can retain maybe 90% after 72 hours. Sometimes I'm not even sure. I hesitate to ask people, what did I preach on last Sunday? Because I ain't sure I remember, So I try to do something that will help to cement at least one main idea. As preachers are famous for 3 points in a poem, But if I can get a main idea out of a text to sink in and stay with people, then I feel like I've accomplished a little bit more. And so I like to use visuals as much as I can, and that's one of the reasons that I think God had put me into the chalk ministry, and you've seen some of that that I've talked about on the line here. I don't even know where I pick these things up, but my mind's always thinking and watching, and I've got it at a flea market or one of those pottery outfits, or something where they just sell knick-knack kind of stuff. And it's a battery-powered Dumaflachi that I guess you can hear that. And I set it on my pulpit. And while I'm preaching on Peter's denial, a sermon that I call, Is That a Rooster That I Hear?, I can simply have that in the background, and it'll crow 3 times and quit, usually. And then if it quits, I make sure to go over in front of that magic eye and turn it on again, while I'm preaching. And it just keeps seeming it. It keeps people awake, for one thing, that rooster crowing. And so I can use that. And it wasn't all that expensive, but it was something that I can use to help them to put a visual with this story that they've heard, but perhaps not let it sink in. And so maybe this helps in that respect. If I preach on the prodigal son, I found this one somewhere, and I've set this fella, yes, you can see him there, up on my pulpit. And again, they have magic eye, and I can, supposed to anyway, it'll croak, or not croak, whatever, oink. It gets what a pig does, And so that just keeps going. It keeps people maybe laughing a little bit, but they engage in what I'm sharing. And so I talk about the prodigal son in the pig pen, and I got some visual and some sound effects going on at the same time, and that's a plus there, I think. I preach a sermon out of Exodus called One More Night with the Frogs. And our dear friend Pharaoh, you might remember, was plagued with the frogs at one point there with Moses and his dealings with Moses and getting the children of Israel out of Egypt. And so I found this frog, and while I'm preaching, I've got the sound effects and the visual sitting on the pulpit or on a stand nearby, so that I can go over in front of that magic eye periodically and have that going on. And you might remember that story when Moses goes to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh calls him in after God's brought the plague of the frogs, and Moses is confronted by Pharaoh and says, "You got to get rid of these frogs." First of all, the Pharaoh rather called his own magicians, and they made more frogs. And I also wear a stupid sign that says, if you got too many frogs to start with, why make more? That don't make sense. That's kind of stupid. And then Moses said, "Well, when do you want me to get rid of them?" And he said, "Tomorrow." Man, if it was me, I'd have said yesterday. Let's get rid of these things. I don't want them anymore. I don't want even one more night. But that's what Pharaoh said. One more night with these stupid frogs in my house and in my bathroom and everywhere else, on my bed. And I'll live with it one more night. And so people, again, see the visual, hear the sounds, and that helps to remind them of the story that I'm sharing from God's holy word. I even went into Cracker Barrel one day and found this witch's broom. They had it sitting in the lobby there as you went into the restaurant, and it even comes with sound effects, and it moves. Got a switch on it here. And I put a hat on top of it, and it will move around on its own free will. And so I had to put a little box of wood, make a lot of racket. I had to put a box on the platform, outline a box, so that it would roll around, and when it hits the side of the wall there, it would turn and go somewhere else, so that, let me turn that off so you can hear me, so that, it wouldn't roll off the platform. But I talked about the evils in the world, and so while I'm preaching, ever so often that witch's broom would come swinging across the platform there, and doing this little cackling thing. I have to raise my voice a little bit maybe, but at least there's that anticipation, so it keeps them awake while you're trying to share the good news and the truth of God's Word. And that's just one of the ways that I've been able to put some visual effects to my messages and help them to sink in. I preached on sailing through life one day and had all my children come up to the front, gave them a piece of paper, had them fold paper airplanes, and then come up and stand on a chair behind the pulpit and throw it into the congregation. And we had a center aisle, and I said, whoever gets the furthest and the straightest, gets a prize. And I forgot to tell the mothers in the choir that I had their children making paper airplanes on the front row, and when they came out, there comes these evil eyes, But the kids went and did that. After the service was over, I had preached on sailing through life and given a prize of one of those styrofoam gliders to the kid that got the furthest and the straightest and all that. One of my big burly truck drivers I'd led to the Lord came up and said, "Preacher, I didn't get a chance to fly a paper airplane." Well, guess what? Next time, for a few weeks down the road, I preached another sermon on donut heaven or donut hell. And I had adults, 6 of them, come up and make a paper airplane and fly it into the balcony. And if they could get to the balcony, they got to go to donut heaven. If they didn't, they had to go to donut hell. Well, none of them made it to the balcony, but they all had to go to donut hell. And I said, here's donut hell. And I had a box of Krispy Kremes, only it was empty. I said, if you had been able to get your airplane into the balcony, if you could have gone through life and achieved that goal of perfection, then you could have gone to donut heaven. And I opened up, and here's a nice box of Krispy Kremes, I said, but I want to talk to you about grace. I said, none of you deserved it because you didn't get to the balcony with your paper airplane, but because I love you, I'm going to give you some grace, and I'm going to give each of you a donut. And they go back out to the congregation with their Krispy Kreme, eating their Krispy Kreme, People remembered that message because they got to participate even to a degree and visualize this heaven and hell and God's grace that was given to all of us, even though we didn't deserve it. We were able to receive from His loving hand. And so there's all kinds of ways that you can present the gospel. You don't compromise any of that, but you use these visuals to help cement that in somebody's mind. I preach a striptease sermon, I call it. They don't know it. When I come in, I've got my suit on, and then I've got 5 layers of clothes. And as I preach, I begin peeling off. And boy, you can get the congregation really concerned about the preacher up there taking his pants off and everything. I didn't realize I had on 3 pair of pants, or 5 t-shirts underneath. But I got down to the end, and I had on a pair of jeans and a pair of a t-shirt that had a big heart on it, and in phosphorescent puff paint it says, "Satan, you can't touch this, it belongs to Jesus." And that was able to cement that message out of David's life, where Nathan pointed the finger at David and said, "You're the man." You remember that. And I talked about the facades we wear to cover up our sin, and yet when it's all stripped away, people need to see that the real me, the real you, needs to belong to Jesus. Now, I hope that these will be helpful to you. Find your own. God will give you some direction. Just teach the truth, teach the word, and let His light shine on.